building an amazing whiskey is way more than just making incredible liquid. That is the most important part. But ultimately, things like what we've talked about on the previous ones about your bottle and the cork and other things are really, really important about how you make your whiskey stand out on shelf. Now, a really, really important part to those is the label and the decoration. So when we look at the various choices, I mean, there are just so many. When you think about the label, there are just endless choices. I mean, the paper, the color, the foils, the embossing, is spot UV, and on and on and on and on in terms of the choices. But when you look at sort of some of the existing bottles out there in the market, you can get a sort of sense of what's around. So to me, this is classic whiskey. You know, I think Laphroaig have done a great job in simplifying this brand. Really has a couple of colors. It has black, white and green, and obviously the signature green bottle. But on there is very little in the way of embellishments or other things that you'll find on other brands. When you go and look at sort of, say, from another Scottish whisky, obviously the Macallan, you know, here's a good example. You know, this is where you start to see just some really subtle elements of foiling, a little bit of raised text, and you know, the paper's a little bit different, and little things like this structure here on the bottle. You start to get into those kind of options. Then you look at, once you're out of sort of label territory, into things like prints, and I think Lagavulin on this one, yeah, so it's a little bit hard to see in this light, but on there is a print or a transfer here. There we go. The label, again, a little bit of foiling, a little bit of detailing, and then you can sort of step up to, say, some of the, you know, the premium English whiskies that are around, like the Lakes. I think they've done an interesting job in terms of their choice. It's a good choice of, you know, good foiling and embossing and all sorts of textures and things. Again, just really nice to touch and feel and what they look at. I think the English with their latest iteration, I think that's Andrew and the team have done a really nice job there. It's starting to look really nice, quite characteristic, quite unique, and quite an interesting bottle with particularly this big flange on the top. And then you go to something like, for example, you know, the top end, if you like, or pretty close to the top end. I mean, Johnny Walker Blue, I mean, the absolutely iconic angular stripe, but on here is a mix of prints, transfers, foils, textures, everything on there. I mean, the bottle weighs an absolute ton, but you've got to admit that it is a thing of beauty, that, and really does stand out lovely. So, you know, your choices are incredible. For us, you know, we looked at various things. So on our labels, we're going through the process now in terms of finalizing. We've got a good design. So you can see here in this image, you can see what we're trying to get to in terms of a nice balance of some foilings, but there's all sorts of detail to be designed in there about embossing. We're also going for a print, so a bit of a mix of, say, what you see on like the Lagavulin and the Johnny Walker Blue, is where there's a transfer or a print on the glass as well as the label. That's something that we think would be quite interesting and unique, and we're going to use that illustration to try and tell a story, and I'll talk about that a lot more when we've actually got some samples, because they're just being sampled at the moment to see, do they work on the glass, do they work on the curves that we've got on the glass. But there are just so many choices you can go for. So in terms of like right down to, you know, the kind of paper that you print your labels on, and then whether or not you go to use things like, you know, aluminium structures and metal stickers and prints and other things. So the choices are incredible. I mean, fascinated to read in the comments what you guys think is valuable. Also interesting to see any sort of ideas of what you guys think is really good, and you look at and think that is just an amazing label or an amazing bottle, or the combination of it all working together it just leads to a really, really great product. Anyway, but there'll be more to come in terms of our decoration, more to come on our label as we go through that process. Try and get some color sampling done to see how the ink is going to land on the paper. We've chosen the foil that we want, but we want that foil and that metallic to flow through everything we're doing. So there's a lot of little steps to go, and a lot of things that could go wrong. So follow along at ChrisBuildsAWhisky, both on Instagram and TikTok, but also the long form stuff you'll find on YouTube, where you can delve a bit deeper into each of the components of the story.